Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be reviewing the solo mode for Ruination from designer Travis Chance and publisher Colossal Games. In Ruination, you are playing a faction in a post-apocalyptic world who is fighting against the forces of the Khan and their mighty horde. Let's head over to the table. I'll give you a general overview on how the solo game plays, really how it differs from the multiplayer game. Then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we see the solo game for Ruination set up. I just want to point out that to be able to play this game solo, you have to include the expansion known as The World That Was. Also, I'm not going to be going into a whole lot of a rules overview here. I'm actually going to refer you to Z Garcia's fantastic review of the multiplayer game. I'll actually link that video in the comments of this video or in the description of this video if you want to get a better idea of the general mechanics of the game. What I'm really going to be focusing on in this video are the differences between the solo game and the multiplayer game. All right, so first things first is that the setup is a little bit different. You choose a particular faction of your choice as the player, and I chose the Purge here just for purposes of our example. The blue units in this corner, okay? And it tells you which units to put out there. Every other unit that you see on the board, no matter the color, is considered to be part of the Khan's horde, and that is who you are battling against. It is you and your faction against the Khan, okay? There is only one way to win the game, the solo game, and that is to win a battle in this very central region known as the Citadel. However, it's not as simple as just getting up a bunch of troops and barreling into the Citadel. There are some limitations. The main ones being that before you go into the Citadel, you have to defeat every unit in these two outer regions. And even beyond that, you cannot initiate a battle in either of these two regions until every other unit in the other areas of the board have been completely eliminated. So you have to eliminate all of the units in the outer areas before you can even initiate a battle in these two central regions. Once all those units have hopefully been defeated, then you could try to go into the Citadel and win a battle there. Now, you only see one unit in the Citadel right now. Throughout the course of the game, more and more units will be added to that area to make it a larger and more difficult climactic battle. All right, so on your turn, you're going to be doing essentially what you would normally do in the multiplayer game. You are going to be taking one of three different actions. You're either going to be scavenging or moving or recruiting, and you do that by taking a card off of the associated deck. Now, in addition to that core action, scavenge, move, or recruit, depending upon what's on the card, you will be doing other things as well. So, for example, if I wanted to scavenge on my first turn, I would take this top card from the scavenge deck, which is going to allow me to generate some resources based upon what units I have and in what different regions, but it's also going to do some other things. In this case, it's going to be moving me up 2 on the favor track, and it's also going to give me 1 recruit point. So by actually taking this card, not only am I scavenging, I'm also potentially recruiting a unit as well. All right, so you take your turns as normal, doing whatever the associated card actions tell you to do. In this case, I'd be moving up twice on this track. I might be recruiting a unit, and I'd be gaining some resources depending upon where I'm at on the board, okay? The main difference in the game comes on what you do on the Khan's turn, okay? You alternate turns as you would in a normal game. On the Khan's turn, what you're going to do is you are going to move what in the multiplayer game is the first player token. Here, you're going to move it between the favor track and the glory track. So on the Khan's first turn, you would move this over here, you would move their token in that associated spot, and you would do something depending upon what happens on that track. Now, in this first track, there's nothing that happens there. But along these different tracks, different things are going to happen for the Khan. They're either going to gain victory points by moving them up on the associated track, They may be gaining some citadels that make them more powerful, that will, generally speaking, go into that central area there. They may be recruiting units into their home territory, which in this case is going to be the citadel. They might be recruiting grunts. They might be recruiting brutes. Or they may be scoring. Now, why would scoring matter for the AI if the only way that you can win is by winning a central territory? Well, it matters in that every time either you or the Khan scores any of these points, if they ever cross a 10-point threshold, okay, what you're going to do then is you're going to take the top card of this Khan's power deck and you're going to do whatever it says. So let's just say in this case, it says Khan's might. The Khan gains 1 on the tracks. They add 1 grunt to each territory they control with a bastion, okay? So these are all things that you as a player don't want to have happen. They're not going to be good for you, all right? And that happens again every time either you or the Khan's forces pass a 10-point threshold. Another thing that's different in the solo game is that I did say that on your turn, you do things pretty much exactly the same way as you do in the multiplayer game, and that's true with one exception. You have a new step called Defiance, okay? And the Defiance step is that at any time, at the end of your turn, you could choose to spend 10 victory points to immediately take another turn before the Khan takes his. That prevents the end of the round from happening, and that could be crucial because the end of the game can trigger before you have gotten to that central region to fight the Khan there. And if you've got some points built up, you can spend 10 victory points to take an extra turn before the end of the round and potentially the end of the game if you have not gotten to that central region. Now, this being a game with a lot of troops on the map, as you might expect, there is a lot of battling. There's a lot of fighting. Anytime that your forces are in a spot with one of the Khan's forces, you're going to be fighting. You're going to be rolling these dice, and in the solo game, what you're going to do is you're going to roll dice depending on the number and types of units, and for the Khan, you're going to be consulting this card over here. There are 2 different cards that come in the game. This one says the Master of the Blood Throne. This one is the Wasteland Warlord. You just randomly choose one at the beginning of the game, okay? And these are going to determine what happens when you roll stars on the dice. So when you roll dice for the Khan, if they get this adds to their strength in battle. So they would get 2 extra strength in battle. If they get stars, what you do is you consult this card. So in this case, 2 stars means that they have a casualty that they're going to inflict, and they add even more strength to that battle. If they had 3 stars, they would get +1 strength and 1 casualty. If they get 4, the Khan's going to gain 5 points. Then the Khan becomes enraged, and you flip it over, and now this Khan is even tougher than they were before, okay? So this is a way for you to determine how to kind of use what it shows on the dice. So power means power, stars are going to be referred to as there, and the blank spots are going to give them victory points as well, all right? So the game can end a couple of different ways. As I said, if you can defeat the Khan in the central area here, the Citadel, you've won the game immediately. Otherwise, you're going to have the Khan's Fury get invoked, and that is denoted by this symbol right here, and you can see that token right there, okay? And how can that happen? It can be invoked in one of 3 ways. If either you or the Khan moves to the 10th space on either one of the 2 tracks, that invokes that final round. If you or the Khan ever reach or exceed 30 points, that will trigger it. Or if you discard the last card in one of those decks, that will also invoke the Khan's Fury, and you have basically very little bit of time, if you have not gotten to the center, to be able to win the game, and you very likely will have to be spending those victory points to try to take an extra turn before the end of the game. All right? So that's the basics. You'll take your turn either scavenging, moving, or recruiting. The Khan will take its turn by moving this back and forth and moving along the associated tracks. When when they move on these tracks, actually this should have been here at the beginning of the game, when they move along these tracks, they're going to be gaining different things. The Khan will gain victory points. If they get to one of these bastion tokens first, they'll gain it and put it in the Citadel, which makes them stronger. They might invoke the Khan's Fury. Over on that side, they're going to be recruiting units into the Citadel with either 1 or 2 recruit points. They're going to be scoring based on their bastions, things along those lines, okay? Which is very similar to the multiplayer game as well. All right, well, I think that gives you a general idea on how the solo game plays. Let's head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so hopefully it gives you a pretty good idea on how the solo game of Ruination plays out. I didn't cover every single rule, and like I said, if you wanted a better idea of the general mechanics of the game, you could check out Z's review of the multiplayer game. All right, so the first thing I want to do is talk about some solo benchmarks. These are some kind of high-level ideas that I use when I'm assessing whether I'm going to take a solo game off the shelf or not. The first is win-loss conditions. Does it have a beat your high score variant? Are you playing against an automated opponent? In the case of Ruination, you are fighting off against the hordes of the Khan. And so, as you saw there at the beginning of the overview, you start off in a very weakened position. You are in one little corner of the wasteland map, and surrounding you are all of the forces of the horde. For a game like this, that's what I'm looking for. This is a troops on the map style game. I can't imagine trying to play this as a high score variant. I really do think that they had an interesting approach. I'll talk about that later on, but this is definitely a win-loss. You're either going to defeat the Khan there in that central region, or you're going to lose. So I feel like this is a very good way to handle a game like this. Setup and teardown is another thing that I like to discuss, and this game is one that has a lot of components. You saw that in the overview. This is not a small box solo card game where you're going to be up and playing in a minute and a half. So it takes a bit of time to set the game up. It takes a bit of time to tear the game down. If you are incorporating those elements from the expansion, which you have to be able to play this as a solo game, it adds a little bit of time. However, that being said, for the experience that you're getting, I don't feel like it's an exorbitant amount of time for setup and teardown. This is a game that's going to present you with more of a experience that you would expect for a game with this amount of components. It would bother me if I take 5 to 10 minutes to set the game up and it's over in 15 minutes and it doesn't feel like I had a full game session in there. This is going to be a game where you really feel like you have played a full, robust experience by the end of it, so the setup and teardown doesn't bother me at all for this one. Rules is another thing that I like to mention, and the rules for this game are good, generally speaking. The rules for the solo game are part of the expansion rules, which come in a separate little, it's not really a booklet, it's more a sheet of paper that you kind of unfold. But the rules were generally clear. I feel like they did a good job of explaining the differences between the multiplayer game and the solo game. They gave examples where it was appropriate. I didn't feel like there were a lot of edge cases. Anytime where you had to make a decision, they were clear about how you would make that decision. So for example, if you defeat some of the Khan's hordes units, it tells you exactly in what kind of order to do so. If you're going to be recruiting units into the Khan's forces, it tells you how to do that. You know exactly what to do when you're rolling stars with the battle dice. So they did a good job of explaining how the solo rules differ. No complaints there. All right, art and components. First of all, I adore the theme, okay? I'm a big fan of post-apocalypse, and this is, I suppose, I think they're calling it post-apocalypse, so I'm down for that too. I like the theme a lot, and I really, really like the art in this game. I feel like it is one of the standout elements of Ruination. The art really evokes this theme well. It has kind of those bright, saturated colors that are kind of balanced against the brown from the kind of, you know, industrial feel, the wasteland feel. So I really like how the direction they went with the art in this game. It's, of course, not going to be for everybody, but it is for me. I really, the first time I saw this game, I was impressed with the art, and it's one of those games where I even liked looking through the cards just to kind of look at the little details on there. I honestly feel like this has a good tone, if that makes any sense. Whereas with these types of themes, it's hard to strike a balance sometimes between evoking the kind of terror that can be inherently involved in a post-apocalyptic theme with either being too cartoony or too serious. I feel like this has a really nice balance between having that post-apocalyptic theme where you can kind of get that sense of kind of mayhem and terror, but I feel like it also has a little bit of a sense of humor that's underlying it. Not anything cheesy or over the top, but it really had this nice sense of tone where I felt like it evoked the theme, but didn't take itself too seriously and wasn't too cartoony. So I appreciated that. The card quality I felt like probably was a bit lacking. These are not the highest quality cards that I've ever come across. A little bit of warping I've found over time playing it. Nothing that's game breaking, nothing that would feel like I haven't sleeved the game. I'm sure if you did sleeve the cards, that would kind of alleviate that. I don't know if you need to sleeve the cards, but you may want to if you're a card sleever. I like the minis. I feel like the sculpts are all very nice. There was a little bit of bending, like when you have spears, but you know that seems to be almost standard with tabletop quality miniatures. And so I don't have really any complaints. I like how the different factions have the different minis. I like how they handled the different shaped bases for the minis to easily denote what type of unit it is. So I have nothing but good things to say about the art, and I like the minis. A little bit of issue with the cards, but not anything game breaking. All right, so for the overall solo experience, first I'm going to talk about some positives, a couple of things I felt like could have been done better, and then give you my overall score. First of all, I really appreciate the design approach to this solo variant. It has a nice balance of feeling enough like the multiplayer game so that if you've played the multiplayer game first, which I did, I played the multiplayer game a number of times before I ever played the solo game. It feels enough like the multiplayer game, but still has its own unique, distinct experience. All right, and that's nice. Sometimes in solo variants, particularly in games like this, where it's kind of a troops on the map game, it almost feels like a completely different game. Ruination doesn't. It still keeps the same core mechanics. However, it does have a very distinct feel to it as well. So it strikes a nice balance between enough of the central core mechanics still feeling like you're playing Ruination, but the solo game kind of has its own vibe as well. It focuses more on efficiency, and I really did appreciate that solo design approach. It feels very challenging. This is a game that I have really struggled to win, and I don't feel like it's unfair. It never feels like you're just getting pounded upon. It doesn't feel unfair. But it is challenging, and it very much rewards efficiency, which I mentioned a moment ago. I tend to like efficiency puzzles in my solo games. And so this is kind of a cool situation where you've got this combat-focused troops on a map game, which in and of itself is, you don't find a lot of solo games in that genre. We're getting more over the years, but it's still not an oversaturated genre by any means in solo gaming. It has that feeling, that vibe, but it also has the kind of efficiency puzzle vibe that I love in solo games. So I do like the efficiency while still having the fightiness that you would expect in a game like this. Another positive is that I feel like they did a good job of not placing an undue burden on the solo player during the con's turn. You're not having to spend more time administering the con's turn than you are on your own turn. Especially in a game like this. I've played a few troops on a map or majority area control type games as a solo gamer. And the biggest issue that I tend to find with them is that oftentimes on the AI's turn, there is a huge amount of administration you have to go through as a solo player. Sometimes even going through literal flow charts to determine what's going to happen. Ruination does not have that issue at all. The con's turn is very simple. All right, you really don't have to spend nearly as much time on the AI's turn as you do on your own, and that's the ratio I like in a solo game. So well done on that front. A couple of things I want to bring up as potential negatives is that I'm not sure that there's going to be enough variability from game to game to warrant a whole lot of plays as a solo game. I'm not sure what that spot is yet. I still am going to continue to play this as a solo game. I don't feel like I've kind of run through it, played it enough that I feel burnt out on it. But I just am not sure. This is still to be determined. It doesn't feel like one game plays out incredibly differently from the next, and so I do wonder if there's going to be a shelf life on this. I haven't reached it yet, but it is something that I need to consider and mention, because it could be something, if you want to get, name your number, 20 plays out of it. I'm not sure if it's there. I haven't played quite that many. I haven't reached my limit yet, but I do want to mention that. The other thing to mention is that this is a game that, as I said, to play it solo, you need to have the expansion. And so the question inevitably comes up when I'm reviewing a solo game. Do you recommend this as purely a solo game? And this is where it gets tricky for me. It really does get tricky for me because, as I said, I played the multiplayer game first. I really, really like the multiplayer game, and I have no hesitation in recommending that as a multiplayer game experience. So, do I recommend it unabashedly as a multiplayer game? Yes, but this is a big game. It's not inexpensive as you would expect because there's a lot of components. Add to that the expansion that is necessary to play it as a solo game, and do I feel comfortable recommending it only for solo play? It's really tough. It's really tough. If you already are interested in playing this as a multiplayer game, or if you already have purchased it as a multiplayer game and you are interested potentially in playing it as a solo game, absolutely go ahead and I say get that expansion, because I think that you're going to find a really unique solo game experience. Do I feel comfortable just saying go out and get the base and the expansion solely for a solo play? That gets a little bit tougher because like I said, there is a fair amount of investment in that. How many plays are you going to get out of it? I don't know. So this has been a tricky one for me. I'm going to just rate this as the solo experience that I have played and enjoyed, and I have. I'm going to be giving this an 8 out of 10. This is a seal of approval. Again, keep in mind, though, that if you are coming to it solely for solo play, understand the variability may not be there. However, I feel like overall, it's a very unique solo design. I appreciate the approach that they took to the solo variant, and for that, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10 and a solid seal of approval. All right, well, that's it for me. Mike DiLisio, signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.